Welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined today by my co-hosts Matt Mlodzinski and Ben Anderson. And the transfer portal has been depleted to a certain extent. A lot of players have already been finding their new destinations, but plenty new entries into the transfer portal, and plenty of players still have not found their homes. Of course, there's the added element of the NBA draft, and we don't know who's going to keep their name in that. But today we're going to talk about some of the top players that are still in the transfer portal and where we see their best fits going. We each made a list of 5 players with one team we think they fit really well at. So I'm going to throw it to Matt first. Matt, just give me any player off of your list and what you're thinking for fit.
Yeah, I'll go bottom to top off my list. I'll look at Wuga Poplar. First off, tremendous shooter, scored the ball a little bit for Miami, a guy that Jim Larrañaga sort of over the years, he developed him more and more. So it's kind of cool to see where Poplar has come from. I think a lot of teams could use his scoring and his shooting, and I think Villanova would be the best fit. You look at a Villanova team, I mean, we've joked about it. They've lost pretty much their entire roster. A guy like Poplar, I think, has the opportunity to come in, give Villanova some much-needed shooting and scoring that they desperately need, and perhaps for himself, even selfishly, do that as either the number 1 or the number 2 guy, which he was never able to get at Miami. And I don't know if he'll be able to get that with Miami if he were to stay. I don't know if he'll get that elsewhere. I think Villanova gives him that opportunity. So I don't know if that's what he's thinking, but if I'm Villanova, I need a scorer and a shooter, which Poplar is. And if I'm Poplar, I'm saying, hey, how can I elevate my status, maybe get myself to the league? Seems like that's a good interchange right there.
Ben, did you have Poplar on your list? I did not personally have him, but
I did not either, but I did have a different Miami player, so I think we can go straight there. I want to talk about Norchad Omier, who is an incredible rebounder, of course. He was a main stalwart in Miami's Final Four run 2 seasons ago. And my ideal destination is right back in Coral Gables for Omier. I think that he can play such a pivotal role, especially with the Hurricanes' sort of perpetual lack of big men. They did bring in Lynn Kidd from Virginia Tech, who's a solid piece, but I don't think he can be that one to elevate them like they have some of their guards, whether that's Cleveland or Natural Pack or Jalil Bethea, who's a 5-star guard coming in. I do think that Omier has a place back on that team, and I think he can elevate the Hurricanes to maybe what they looked like 2 seasons ago when they made that Final Four run.
I had Omier on my list as well. I did not have him going back to Miami, although first off, just to preface, this is saying, assuming he does not stay in the NBA draft, I think that's still up in the air, right? But I had St. John's as his best fit. I think that's what their reports are indicating his most likely landing spot is. And with Joel Soriano gone, Soriano is really their only productive true big man for St. John's last year. I think Omier fits what Rick Pitino is looking for in a power forward or a center spot. And I think that he has a real opening to be a very, a player that they rely on a lot at St. John's next year. So I think from both Omier's perspective and St. John's perspective, that is a likely landing spot for him that would make a lot of sense. But
I'll just make the trifecta here because I also had Omier on my list, and I think we can all agree that he's one of the most interesting transfers left in the portal because of all the success that he has had. I feel like a lot of times, first off, and this is a side note, like transfers are usually guys that, maybe it didn't work out at their past school and they had one good year and they're trying it out somewhere else. Like Omier is a guy who it has worked out for a few years, and now he's in the portal. So who knows what he's going to do. So I kind of see where you're coming from, Ben, in why he might return to Miami after all. And Dan, I see that. It's a need for St. John's. I look at Arkansas, though, and I look at a guy that started at Arkansas State, maybe returning home to the state he once played in, but this time at the big program. Big brother, not little brother, or like little brother, if we're being honest, between Arkansas and Arkansas State. It all depends with the minutes there. They have some front court guys. John Calipari has hit the recruiting trail. He's brought in some guys from Kentucky. I don't know if they need a guy like Omier, but at the same time, can't you always use a guy like Omier? Like you would think that even with all the competition there, he would still start at Arkansas. I think it would give them one of the top front courts in the country. I don't know. I mean, Fit-wise, it all depends on the minutes and where Coach Cal would want to spread the minutes around, but I think that could be a real interesting place for him to land.
Well, you just talked about Coach Cal's new school. I'm going to talk about his old school, Kentucky, and a player that I think he could realistically land there, try to set up a visit for him to go there. I don't know. I think St. John's is still the favorite for him. But the player I'm talking about is Kadary Richmond, who, Matt, you know a lot about him. He's just that do-it-all point guard, veteran guy, played 4 seasons combined at Syracuse Seton Hall, 15.7 points per game, 7 rebounds, 5.1 assists. The only thing really lacking in his game is that consistent three-point shot. But for Kentucky, with their new identity with Mark Pope, getting that veteran point guard to set the foundation of a new coaching tenure and really be that anti-John Calipari player, because he's the complete opposite of the mold of a point guard Kentucky has had in the past. But maybe that'll be kind of refreshing for Kentucky fans. And for Kadary Richmond himself, it would be the opportunity to play in a larger spotlight. Like I said, I think St. John's is the favorite right now to land him, but they're trying to set up a visit for him, so it's a realistic landing spot. Kadary Richmond to Kentucky.
I don't have Kadary Richmond on that line actually, but I want to transition over to someone that I also can think that I can also envision fitting well in the Big East, and that's actually Coleman Hawkins. So this was a last-minute transfer into the portal. He's also obviously testing the NBA draft waters, but one place I was looking into for Hawkins is actually Creighton. So we did just get notice right before we came on air today that Ryan Kalkbrenner is indeed returning to Creighton. So that might make it a little bit more difficult of a transition, but I still think there is a space to be filled by Trey Alexander and Baylor Shireman that could make it a little bit interesting for Hawkins and for the Blue Jays down in Omaha. So what I've envisioned is that like Mason Miller was a serviceable 4-man, right? He could stretch the floor a little bit, but he wasn't necessarily anyone that people were super scared of, that they had super high on their scouting chart. And Hawkins can add a dimension and all of a sudden make a very large front court that can be very difficult for Big East teams to deal with. I'm just very interested to see if that's a potential fit, especially because they're losing a guy like Shireman.
It's interesting you say that, because I really think that Hawkins and Kalkbrenner, I mean, that could be one of the top backcourt or front court punches in the country when it gets down to it. I mean, you're talking about one of the top players in the Big East, potentially the Big East Player of the Year favorite, and a guy like Coleman Hawkins, who, like, I thought he would have been a reason that Illinois might have been able to take down UConn. I was proven otherwise, but, I mean, that could be key. He seems like a Creighton fit. I'm going to transition back to Kadary because, Dan, you had him at one blue blood in Kentucky. I've been another blue blood in Duke. And, you know, I think Kentucky would be a good fit, but I'm just concerned with Lamont Butler, with Kurt Kriisa, with the amount of guards that are now at Kentucky. Would there be room for all three? How would that look? Would there be too much facilitating on the court? Because Kadary is a guy who needs the ball in his hands. I feel like, excuse the vacuum in my background, people cleaning up here. I'm at work right now. And speaking about work, I feel like Kadary Richmond is a guy that could go to work for Duke. I mean, you look at Jeremy Roach on the way to Baylor. So Duke, what do they need? They need a facilitator. They need someone to come in, pass the ball, get other guys shots. I feel like Kadary does that well. And Jeremy Roach was a good facilitator. I know that, you know, Duke it was kind of like a committee that passed the ball for them and play made. But Kadary could really come in and give them someone they haven't had as a facilitator in quite some time. He can rebound the basketball, something that Roach didn't do. Any team could use Kadary, and I feel like Duke could be a real good fit.
Interesting.
Yeah, I want to touch on that because I feel like you could almost say that Duke would run into sort of the same problems as Kentucky if that's something you're concerned about, because all of a sudden you have Proctor and Caleb Foster and Kadary Richmond. That's not a ton of shooting, and I think that's sort of what plagued Duke. And I'd be interested. I definitely agree that they need some sort of driver on to run the point, but I wonder if they could all share the ball in the same way and make it as much of a flowy type of offense that they need, especially when you bring in someone like Cooper Flagg that's also going to be demanding the ball.
I mean, like, for me, I feel like it's that experience. Like, Duke is a very inexperienced team, whereas Kentucky right now are bringing in experienced transfers. I feel like Duke's still like that freshman, sophomore mold where maybe Kadary's experience could work out. If we're being honest, too, like, I feel like St. John's is the landing spot. but it's just tough for me to see that. I mean, it'd be crazy for someone to play at Syracuse, Seton Hall, and St. John's. That's like unheard of. But he's a Northeast kid, so we'll see.
Sticking along the lines of experience and in the Tobacco Road area, I'm going to talk about Cliff Omoruyi, who spent 4 seasons at Rutgers, was a double-digit scorer, like a 10-10 guy, I think like 10-8, something like that. Just an elite defensive rim protector type guy. And I think he fits really well at North Carolina next year. North Carolina has a really stacked backcourt once again with the news of RJ Davis running it back, going back to Chapel Hill for another year. But without Baycott, right? I mean, you're missing that true big man. And taking a visit to Chapel Hill this weekend will be Omoruyi. I've heard Alabama is also in the mix for Omoruyi, but that doesn't make as much sense to me because just the Nate Oates style, like someone who doesn't shoot a million 3-point shots. I don't think Omoruyi even has that 3-point shot in his bag. So I don't think he's a perfect fit at Alabama the same way he's a great fit at North Carolina.
I'm going to jump in here because I also have Omoruyi on my list. I see him staying in the Northeast. I don't know his overall like team list or anything like that. So they might not be recruiting him, but I feel like Georgetown would be the perfect place for a guy like Cliff, someone who's physical, a Georgetown team coached by Ed Cooley, who's done wonders with big men in his tenure, whether it be at Providence or now trying to get it going at Georgetown. And I feel like for me, those are 2 big reasons why if he stayed in the Northeast, went from Big Ten to Big East, but, it's that same vibe, Rutgers to Georgetown, would that be the right spot? The reason why I don't see it working out is because he probably wants to win. And let's be real, Georgetown is like, maybe they bring in guys, but it's not a given. So I'm hesitant there. I feel like it'd be a cool place for him to be at. It would make sense for his style of play. But I do like the North Carolina pick, so I want to shout that out. I know we kind of conflicted on the Kadary pick. I will say I like your North Carolina pick here for Cliff.
Yeah, and to defend Alabama here real quick, I do think there is a spot for a player like Omoruyi in Nate Oates' system. You've seen it sometimes with Charles Bediako. He wasn't out there shooting threes. Or you could say Nick Pringle, sort of, kind of, right? As long as they're athletic and I think they have some sort of rim protection, which I believe Cliff does, I think there's some sort of area where they can go. I will say I think I've created my list a little bit differently than y'all. I didn't focus on the best players overall, although I do think every player I have are really good ones. I focused more on the fit, and that's why I wanted to bring up a player that's sort of unsung in this time, and that's Jaylen Wells out of Washington State. He's not a no name necessarily. He didn't have some amazing season, but the advanced staffs love him. And the reason I'm picking him is because I think a team like Virginia could absolutely use him at this position. So for those of you that don't know, there are really 2 stats you need to know. One is that he's 6'8", and one is that he can shoot. He finished with a stat line of 41% from beyond the arc on 168 attempts. So it's not like this was not a ton of options, and that's exactly the type of player that I think the Cavaliers need at this point. They need an athletic 4. Tony Bennett can teach you how to defend. But not necessarily. You're going to look for shooting, obviously, in the portal. And I think this could be a particularly good add as they need an athletic 4 to replace Ryan Dunn and sort of round out that roster. They do have an interesting freshman coming in Jacob Kofi, but that's not a ton of experience, especially when you're relying on him to learn the defense in 1 year. I'd be interested to see how Jaylen Wells and that Washington State connection plays out.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about past transfer successes at Virginia. They've been athletic 4 men. Trey Murphy, Sam Hauser, guys that could shoot the ball, guys that have length. So that would definitely be another one along those lines. I'm going to go further down on my list and go to the Mountain West and talk about the freshman of the year last year, and that is JT Toppin, who, the Mountain West is a great conference, but he proved his athletic superiority really in that conference. And I think he's really bound for an upgrade. And I've been hearing 2 Texas schools have really been in his mix, Texas Tech being one of them. But I'm going to talk about the Texas Longhorns, who are losing their 2 main front court pieces from last year, the 2 Dylans, Dylan DeSue and Dylan Mitchell. They're gone. So there's an opening in the front court. Kane Shedrick is a guy they got last year who was a young, athletic, big man and kind of an exciting piece. He was okay, but I think Toppin would be a lot more exciting and really complete that front court. And he's a guy that was just so productive, just flashed so much potential at New Mexico last year. And I think that he is certainly cut out to be a good Big 12 player or I guess SEC at this point. I keep forgetting that, but either way, like a good Power 4 player, Power 5 player for however many years he stays in college.
Well, you think he can be a good power conference player. I think this next guy can be a great power conference player, and that is great Osobor from Utah State. I see him going to Washington. I see him following Danny Sprinkle and just going with the coach that he's rolled with, whether it be at Montana State, whether it be at Utah State. He stayed in the West Coast. Why not roll it again with a Washington team that's moving on from the Pac-12, going to the Big Ten? They're going to need someone like him if they want to compete in year one in a conference like this. It's not going to be the Pac-12 anymore. This isn't the Conference of Champions anymore for Washington. This is the Big Ten. It's going to be much tougher. I think that Danny Sprinkle makes sure that he gets his guy to follow him. And if you're great, like why wouldn't you do this? It's worked out so well with Danny Sprinkle. They made the tournament at Montana State. They do wonders with Utah State. Make the tournament again. They were great all year long. No pun intended there. Why not keep it rolling? I think that Washington makes the most sense. I know that maybe he wants to try his own thing, but to me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
See, it's interesting you said that. I also have Osobor on my list as well, but I have him going somewhere different, and that is to Milwaukee to join Shaka Smart's Marquette team. Now, this is maybe a bit of a controversial take because obviously Smart has really made his successes off not taking transfers. But I think there is a very big hole that needs to be filled in the big man position for him, especially after Oso Igdaro has left. They really only have Ben Gold, who is definitely serviceable as a backup man. He got like 15 minutes a game last year, but maybe not ready for the centerpiece yet. And they have a couple of freshmen as well, but obviously you never really want to rely on it, especially if you have all these talented players coming back like Cam Jones and CB Mitchell. You're going to be good. You want to be able to be great. And that's where someone like Osobor can come in. I think he doesn't necessarily have the same skill set as Igdaro had, right? He is not necessarily known as a passer, but he can put the ball in the basket. And for those reasons, I just think he's a really solid plug-and-play fit there that can add another dimension to Marquette's offense that they didn't necessarily have last year. They didn't have that post-up game, or it was just a different. It's just a different type of game that Osobor has, and I'm interested to see if that might fit in Marquette's system.
Well, speaking of guys that could put the ball in the bucket, this is a guy that has been rated so highly on all these transfer lists. Maybe not a household name in college basketball, but did you guys have Chaz Lanier on your list per se? Ben, you did. So this is a North Florida transfer. I'll send it back to you, Ben, in a sec. But North Florida transfer, they played in the ASUN, and he just put up video game numbers, both in terms of volume and efficiency. He was like a 61% true shooting percentage guy, rated super highly in the portal by all platforms. And you know where I see his best fit? Tennessee. Tennessee just running it back. They did the exact same thing last year, took a guy with video game numbers at a much lower major level in Northern Colorado, got Dalton Connect, and look what he just did. Had an incredible season, really boosted that offense and got them to a point, got Connect to a point where he's an NBA draft guy. And I think Lanier could potentially do the same thing. He's kind of has his feet in the NBA draft waters already, but I think a productive season, a highly productive season at Tennessee might make sense.
Yeah, I like the Tennessee pick a lot. I think that's where he's been forecast the most if you're following the recruiting of the transfer portal. But what if he wanted to stay in state? I'm considering him going down to Tallahassee and joining the Florida State Seminoles because what they really struggled with last year was shooting. They shot just 31.9% as a team from beyond the arc. So definitely Lanier can add that type of dimension. I also think he has a better chance to be the absolute guy at Florida State as opposed to Tennessee. Obviously, Connect had that type of freedom. And Rick Barnes has now proven that he can take someone and make him the star, right? But at the same time, it's a different type of star at Tennessee that I think you can find at Florida State. So if he really wants to continue having those numbers and to prove that he can score and produce at that high level at the high major conference, he might have a better chance to do that in Tallahassee than in Knoxville. But I really don't think you can go wrong either way with Lanier. It would just be interesting to see him stay in state and sort of give Florida State a star for the first time in a couple of years. And I'm just sort of rooting for them to, be back to relevance and for Leonard Hamilton to have a solid team as well.
Yeah, they need it. I already went through my 5, but I'll say whether it's Tennessee or Florida State, they could use a guy like Chaz Lanier because those teams are in need of scoring. So great picks there, guys.
Yeah, that will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. That we have a lot more transfer portal, mostly stuff coming out, and we've also started doing some YouTube shorts, which are also showing up on our TikTok and our Instagram, just short 1 minute or fewer videos, just daily, every other day, just hot topics in college basketball. So be sure to check those out if you don't have 20 minutes to listen to an entire episode. Thanks so much once again for watching and listening, and take care.